Thank you so much, Meg and Raytheon Technology team. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today. What I would love to do is just kind of open it up for each of you to introduce yourself, tell us, Meg already shared your titles, but if you want to kind of elaborate on a little bit of what you do at Raytheon, and then if you'd like, maybe a fun fact.
Yeah, sure. I'm Martha Castle, and I can kick this off for us. I am an attorney for Raytheon. I primarily support all of our naval power contracts and programs. But on the side, I also serve as the vice president for our Pride employee resource group of the North and specializing in the Northeast region itself. I'm based out of Massachusetts. I've lived there my entire life, but I did spend 1 year in Ireland. And that was actually a fantastic experience. But it was funny because I'm 100% Irish, and many folks came up to me during my stay there and had conversations with me and then asked me to say hello to my mom. So I'm guessing I must look like some other folks wandering around in Ireland. Is it funny?
Awesome. Thank you, Martha. And then next I see Shannon on my screen.
Hi, I'm Shannon Garvey. She or they is fine. I am a systems engineer at Raytheon. I actually just started last June, so I'm a fairly new hire. I'm based out of the Massachusetts area, though I actually just moved up to New Hampshire. And a fun fact about me is that I can play all the brass instruments.
Wow, that is quite a talent. All right, Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas Dixon. I've been with Raytheon for 5 years, just like I was introduced. I work on some of the more classified side of things, so I can't really say too much about exactly what I do, but I guess one of the fun facts about me is I am really colorblind. I'm monochromatic, so I only see in black and white.
Thank you, Thomas. And Jessica.
Hey, I am Sarah Jessica Curry. I go by Jessica or Jess, she, her, hers pronouns, and I work as a hardware quality engineer at Raytheon Technologies. I'm in Forest, Mississippi. I live in Pearl, which is just east of Jackson. When they say Forest, Mississippi, that is what they mean. It is in the middle of the forest. My fun fact is I am looking at my little 7.5-week-old puppy that is laying right beside me right now. He is a German Shepherd, and his name is Odin.
Oh, that might be the cutest fun fact that we've had today. Awesome. Well, the way that we can I go through we're going to ask some questions and feel free for anyone to jump in. I might kind of call on somebody if I think there's something that's kind of more specific. Martha shared that she's the VP of your Pride Network. So we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about Raytheon's employee resource groups. But before we do that, does anyone want to share exactly what is an employee resource group?
Yeah, I can do that. So an employee resource group, that's a concept that developed actually in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. Xerox was one of the first companies that developed a resource group, and it was really to help amplify voices of diverse folks and more integrate their workplace. It has evolved over the years and decades. So while it initially started as affinity groups based on cultural identity and that kind of a background, it instead now has been expanded to also include other groups, affinity groups, such as being a parent or a veteran. And really, it's a platform by which employees can speak to one another, network, and can be leveraged in many different ways in companies for the better of everyone who works there. Did you want me to talk a little bit about Raytheon's?
Yes. Sorry, I
Employee.
completely lost the cursor button and couldn't get off mute. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about Raytheon. You mentioned Pride, and we're obviously at the Pride at Work, but you mentioned a couple other ERG groups. It'd be great to hear a little bit about Raytheon Technologies.
Yeah,
ERG.
sure. No, I'd love to share that. So at Raytheon Technologies, we are still in the midst of consolidating our employee resource groups. We did recently have a merger of two companies, but generally speaking, we have 9 or 10 employee resource groups. So we also have those two buckets. We've got employee resource groups that are defined by the cultural or other identities. So that would be, for example, the Black Employee Network and Pride ERG. And then also folks that share certain experiences or interests, such as veterans and our new employees. And at Raytheon, ERGs play a very vital role. We are involved in employee engagement, community outreach. We help with policy developments within the company, as well as with mentorship and recruiting. So we really kind of run the gamut of the activities that we engage in. What we found to be incredibly successful at Raytheon is that each employee resource group has a senior advisor. That's someone who sits up at the executive suite, and they're really a champion for each of the ERGs and help us navigate the different politics of the company. So that's a little bit about our background.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Martha, for sharing a little bit about, maybe Jessica, do you want to share a little bit about Raytheon's LGBTQ plus or Pride specific ERG?
Sure. We have chapters at several sites. We just started the one in Forest, Mississippi in 2018. And so that was an adventure for sure. But our Pride ERG, what I love about it is that with Raytheon merging, we have Collins and Pratt & Whitney, who also have Pride ERGs. And so coming together, we actually were able to create an event this month, a virtual event, where we are featuring one person in leadership in Pride every day through an email. And it's sent out just to educate our company on who is in Pride leadership and who they can talk to, who is someone that they might have a good conversation with if they have questions about LGBTQ plus issues. So it's a great way to communicate that you are someone to, I hate to say safe place, because we want to encourage that our whole company is a safe place, but in certain regions it's hard to have those conversations. And so just being able to say we're here and we're welcome your conversation is very powerful.
Awesome. We had a question, and it kind of just falls naturally to ask you, Jessica, but feel free for others that are kind of have been in this situation or have kind of helped. For anyone that's interested, it sounds like, Jessica, you were kind of helping start the ERG group in Forest. But for anyone that's interested in starting one of their own company, what would be, Jessica, if you want to start, and then if everyone else wants to maybe give a few tips on what advice you would give to people.
As far as for me, I don't have a national or regional perspective, but I do have a perspective from my local site. I know that being in the South, it's been interesting, not only for our region, but personally for me. I came out to myself only 10 years before we started the chapter at our site. And I realized that the vocabulary for me was still hard to say aloud. I was whispering the words lesbian and gay at our booth where we recruited people to come join the ERG. And so it was very interesting to see how the conversations just rushed out of people once they realized we were present at the company. One thing that we, as Raytheon, we were the first aerospace company to score 100% with the HRC Corporate Equality Index. And I just think that's a tremendous accomplishment, and I love being a part of that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Aimee, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you go ahead. No, I was going to call on you next anyway.
No, that's fantastic. No, so You know, what's great about Jessica and the folks that are on the call today from Raytheon is that you really are getting to hear from people with diverse experiences. I know that some of us have only been with Raytheon for a short amount of time. I've been at the company for 5 years and have spent my entire career in some fashion working diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as a side gig, so to speak. And so what I have found, if you don't already have employee resource groups, if you want to introduce that concept to your company, it's really important to ensure that you're smart on the issue and you establish a clear business case. There are significant business cases that support why employee resource groups are important. And there are great resources online, and including this one, that can help you with that. But once you establish a business case, which should emphasize that you can help increasing the diversity of talent, you can heighten employee engagement, you can target your marketing to certain segments, and also leverage unique perspectives on your products or services. You pitch that to your leadership team. Their natural allies are going to be human resources or the diversity, equity, and inclusion teams if you have those. But don't forget about other natural leaders within your company. You can recruit them as allies. So for example, your CEO, your CFO, or your CMO, the marketing officer, all would have a vested interest in seeing an employee resource group develop and strive.
Great. Those are some great tips. And then Shannon, I believe you mentioned only being at the organization for a year or so. What was the process like kind of coming on board? Did you know when you got there that there was employee resource groups to join? Did someone kind of suggest that there's the different options and then you could align with the ones that you wanted to participate in?
Yeah, so I onboarded last June, and my section manager, well, it was in the height of the pandemic, so we had to meet with masks and distance and everything, but she gave me a welcome packet and recommended to me that I join any ERGs that I would be interested in. So I'm a member of Ray Pride and also the Raytheon Women's Network and YesNet, the group for young professionals. And so all three groups have been able to have events over the past year virtually, which have really made coming in during the pandemic feel more normal because I've been able to meet people and socialize. So it's been really good.
Wow, I love how they kind of incorporated different aspects, especially as I know in the beginning of March last year, some organizations were struggling on what to do, but it sounds like Raytheon is really kind of leading the charge. Thomas, I'd love to hear maybe about a project or something that you've done within an initiative that you've done within the Pride group.
So specifically with our site, I just kind of want to trail off of kind of the previous conversation. It was a big change for a lot of people to see just us putting up a flag. 2 years ago was the first time we did it. I was the person who started, our at the time LGBTQIA, and now it's Ray Pride. But the positive things that came back from that was I had great site support from my site lead. I had a couple of people just ask me questions in general, which having the conversation was really important. I think that there's quite a few older individuals who just don't understand, but they want to be supportive and everything like that. And project-wise, my site, we just don't do too much. We're a very East Coast mentality. You're there to do work, you're there to do things, but putting out those types of things, those types of feelers to say, hey, if you're willing to have a conversation or if you want to talk about something, that's what I've really tried to focus on. Because I know that there's just quite a few people within my specific community that are just not aware, and they just don't have the understanding of what LGBT or those types of conversations have for them.
Great. Well, it sounds like it's been able to open up dialogue and conversation So it's really great to hear. Now, I believe Jessica mentioned doing some different emails every day. What are some other things and initiatives you have planned to celebrate Pride Month this year?
Well, I'll jump in for a second there. One thing that I'm excited about is we're doing something called care cards, CARE, to ensure that our allies feel included during Pride Month, because we wanted to show just the gratitude that we have, you know, in the struggles that we've been through in the LGBTQ plus community. Allies have been there the entire time, no matter their identity. And so the care cards are based around the theme of CARE, conversation leads to awareness, which leads to respect, which leads to empowerment. And so that is our goal. We want to be able to empower each other, but it starts with conversation. And so the care cards, we just made a few templates of cards that basically have a generic thank you message in them that can be shared. And it's just an encouragement to allies, if they would like to write to someone to say, I enjoy our conversations, or the LGBTQ plus community, especially, to write to allies and say, thank you for being there for me. Thank you for the conversations that we've been able to have. I appreciate it. And so that was something that we've been doing, we've started. And so I'm looking forward to our meeting at the end of the month to see how it all went. And so we're going to have kind of a share Zoom and talk back through it and see how it went.
Yep, and on a more national level, we were successful in raising over 50 progress flags at our sites across the United States. You know, some of the other ways in which Raytheon is embracing the LGBTQ plus community are the Zoom backgrounds that you can see, as well as for the first time ever this year, we were able to include the Progress flag colors, Pride flag colors in our logo. So all of that is a great show of support by our company, and something that we as employees really do appreciate.
And then you both kind of brought up interesting things in regards to, it sounds like there's local chapters in the national. How much is done on a local level versus with the national?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have various levels of support for our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at Raytheon. We have professionals who are actually paid to do the work in our human resources department. They support the employee resource groups. We have then global steering committees that go across the entire world, in fact. And then finally, we have regional establishments. And so the regional folks are really the ones that tend to do the local events, do a lot of the employee engagement work, and being there to, as Thomas indicated, start conversations amongst our colleagues. The global team, with the support of DE&I professionals, are the ones that do the branding and the coordinated flag raising events, et cetera, that happen across all of the different regions.
Well, that kind of leads into, as Meg mentioned, you all have day jobs. And then Martha, you mentioned that there are some people within Raytheon Technologies that's job is to kind of help and assist with your employee resource groups. But I'd love to kind of start with you, Shannon, and maybe kind of each of you take a moment or so and just talk about how you manage balancing working with your ERG. You mentioned kind of being involved with 3. So what are some tips and advice for managing being in those ERGs and then your day-to-day work?
Well, most of the events tend to be in the evening. So sometimes, at least more recently with the pandemic, if you want to join events from other regions, which is also very possible, they can be at some weirder times. But most of the events are scheduled for after the workday. So it's fairly easy to work your day, go home, make dinner, and then sit down and just like hop online. There are also some events that are scheduled for around lunchtime usually, and they are a good like midday break, or you can just turn them on in the background and like listen to what people are talking about while doing your work. So most of the events are pretty easy to manage around the workday and whatever else you have to do in your life.
Great. Thomas, do you have anything to add in regards to kind of your involvement, or kind of how you maybe kind of balance and even outside of the employee resource groups, if you have any other work-life balance tips? I know that's it's always something that our community is interested in hearing about.
Yeah, just like Shannon said, we definitely have some things that are outside of that, but what I have actually found is throughout my day, if I have something that's ERG related, whenever I'm really stressed out with a problem I'm trying to solve, walking away from that problem in my like engineering life and then going to like answer somebody's question or look at something that's been posted or something like that really helps in both ways, because it keeps me informed about kind of what's going on or what's happening or what's going to be happening, as well as like usually gets my brain out of the lock that it's in with whatever problem I'm trying to solve. So there's that piece of it, as well as it's I mean, it is a commitment, but if you feel like you're doing something and you're making a difference, I think you get that feeling that it's worth it. So just with that feeling, I think that makes it easier. And I know it's not for everybody. There's definitely not engaged employees at my site with any of it, which is fine. I mean, that's their decision and choice. But for me, if I can answer somebody's question or I can help drive a conversation or be a part of a conversation, it kind of opens up somebody's eyes. I think that's much more beneficial to me in the long run, and for everybody as a whole in the long run, than me having to sacrifice an hour or two throughout my week to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, I was just going to add that it sounds like there's almost like natural water cooler break type of, even with the virtual setting that we're in. So it lets you have that brain break that we all need so desperately. But Jessica, feel free to add to that.
Sure. Thomas, I was just going to say, I definitely get the idea of allowing those conversations to happen. And being in the region that I'm in, it's really been helpful to me to have this community, to have this, global and national level connections with people who are in different regions and who can say, if I'm having a hard time with, my family or something like that, who are not happy with, the way my life is, then I know that I have basically family at RTX who I can talk to and say, I've had this struggle today, and they are able to encourage me and remind me that, things are better in certain places. And for me here, sometimes things are better here than in other places as well. And I need to remember that too. And so it's really good to have those connections. And I'm not as much of I didn't join like sororities in college. I didn't, I was never really a social group person. And so when I joined, I was like, I'll try to fit it in. But once I started meeting people and having those conversations, I realized what a lifeline it was. And so that's why I kind of jumped in feet first.
Yeah, from my perspective, not only is it something that I absolutely enjoy doing, it sparks joy in my life. But I also am finding that being part of the leadership of an employee resource group is really helpful to grow my own personal network, as well as developing leadership skills and developing an executive presence at the company. And that's something that we are trying to leverage at Raytheon to open up doors to various folks, to encourage people to promote themselves in their own careers. And so in that sense, I find the work that we do incredibly rewarding.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Just as a reminder to the live audience, feel free to throw your questions in the chat. We have people that are helping send those questions over to us. So anything you're curious, whether that be specific to Raytheon Technologies or within ERG groups specifically, we'll definitely save some time at the end to ask lots of audience questions. So we love to hear kind of what, how we can maybe help address anything that you're kind of wondering. And now I'd love to kind of, maybe Martha, if you want to kind of go back to you and talk a little bit. You mentioned that each of the ERG groups has an kind of an executive sponsor, and some ideas was making sure that you're getting that buy-in when you start one. But what are some tips and suggestions? There's probably people today that are watching that are from a company with maybe a few hundred employees, and then companies that have 10,000, 100,000 employees. So there's different kind of structures, but what are some kind of tips and suggestions for getting that buy-in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I have had a rather adventurous career, if I may share, and spent some time at a small law firm. And then I went to a nonprofit company, and now I'm here at Raytheon. And, there isn't any one size fits all approach that I have seen to employee resource groups or diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I agree it's unique to the organization that you find yourselves in. When I was at the firm, I was able to leverage the fact that being part or creating an ERG would help us focus our marketing efforts and to attract potentially more clients that are that identify as LGBTQ. And so when I sought buy-in at that point, it was through the marketing folks. At the nonprofit organization, it was more about the presence that we have in our community. And so I worked with the community outreach individuals, the public relations folks, as well as HR to establish employee resource groups, because that was really what made sense for them. And then at Raytheon, I was lucky enough that it already had a robust employee resource group. In fact, our Pride group can trace its roots all the way back to Texas Instruments in 1993. So we've had more than 25 years of existence and rich history. And so that really comes with a very different experience. It has a lot more support of resources, more structure. And we really can handle accomplishing way more than you could at a small organization.
Well, thank you. That's a long time, 25 years, to be able to be kind of an together organization. I'd love to hit on, obviously we can't get away from a conversation without talking about the pandemic and the impact that it's had. How has the pandemic impacted your ERG group? What was it like before? Like, what was it? Were some of these events, in person? Or I'd love to kind of hear kind of what that has been like.
I can jump in here. Funny enough, I think that the pandemic in its own way has provided some new outlets for connection, for coordination within our groups. And to put on a virtual event, now a lot of people have Zoom or have different techie qualities that they may not have had before the pandemic began. But as we were starting last year and realizing, okay, we're not going to be able to meet on site, we can't go out to that restaurant and, things like that, then we had to really find within ourselves the skills. And when we didn't have the skills, we had to reach out to each other. And so even though it was definitely a handicap and a struggle, it also pulled us together and brought us to do virtual events combined. And so like one that we're doing this month that I'm excited about is around Juneteenth. We have an event that the women's group, the Black Employees Network, and Pride are all getting together to talk about. And so I think that that's going to be great. And so we just, we wouldn't have, I won't say we wouldn't have worked together, with the virtual events, but I think that we have a farther reach, even though it is virtual and we like being in person, we like being able to meet people and actually interact. But as I said, here in Mississippi, we don't have a large group. We may have like 3 people on site here who would be very active. We could pull in 1 or 2 here and there for little individual activities. But to have this virtual connection with all of the groups together has been just an amazing opportunity.
Anyone else want to add a little bit to some of the great remarks from Jessica? I'd love to hear about the Juneteenth. That's amazing to hear that 3 groups are coming together. Our organization just started recognizing that 2 years ago. And so it's amazing just as an opportunity to learn and to hear. So I'm imagining in a really large company, it's great because you have so many additional voices to share. Martha, from your viewpoint, how is that? You're the VP of this ERG group, then there's, everything kind of changes. People are working from home. How is it managing that process over the last year?
Yeah, sure. At first it felt clunky and we weren't really sure what to do. I think right at the outset of the pandemic, we didn't really have the bandwidth, either emotionally or otherwise, to do a ton of events. I heard a lot from my colleagues that being forced to quarantine was particularly challenging for them on a personal level. And so because we relied on volunteer efforts, we did not want to add to that stress. But as we began to mature our presence on Zoom and other virtual tools, we actually learned to leverage that, as Jessica was saying, to really reach out to more people and get much higher engagement. And so I'm hopeful that will be able to continue on. You're seeing many more regions work collaboratively. We're pooling resources to get amazing speakers to come in that are being done virtually now. And we can record so that others can see it at their own time and space. So at the end of the day, I feel like the pandemic brought the best out of us. And I look forward to continuing to leverage the new skill sets and the tools we have in the toolbox to keep advancing our work as ERGs.
Well, you've already answered the next question I had for you, what learning lessons or things you'll take forward. But we did have a question, and I think this wants to maybe go back, and this could be Shannon, if you could speak to this, around the events or some of the gatherings being outside of business hours. There's a question from the audience says, do you get much pushback from employees when these events are not within normal business hours?
Not that I've noticed. I feel like even before the pandemic, a lot of companies would do a mixture of events that are mixed between during business hours and after business hours. When I was at Fiat Chrysler, the people would sometimes go out to dinner or go to specific events. And now it's just transitioned to being online. Most of the after work events are more laid back and more less educational and more geared towards networking and just enjoying yourself. So I've been to a wine tasting night where everyone just got wine from I think it was Australian or New Zealand vendor. And tasted it with a sommelier virtually guiding us through it. And there was a YesNet, the Young Employees Group, they've started doing Among Us game nights. And I believe this month for Pride, there's a drag queen bingo night scheduled. Overall, the events are more fun and lighthearted and makes up for having to hop on outside work.
Wow. Bingo, wine tasting, sign me up. This sounds like so much fun. Man, for anyone that wants to work at Raytheon Technologies, run. And it's making defense contracting sound very exciting. I'd love to take some other questions from the audience. There's some great ones that came in. So there's a question around, do you all feel like others in the company take the ERG work seriously? Is it valued at the enterprise level?
What's interesting is I actually started to feel as though it was almost taken for granted. And it wasn't until the last year or so where we have really evolved our conversation over what diversity, equity, inclusion looks like, and have taken a very strategic perspective that the senior leadership, I think, fully started to appreciate all that the employee resource groups give back to the company. From, as the events that you heard from Shannon and Jessica and Thomas, we are the primary employee engagement vehicle, and we have fun doing it, and we meet friends and people that we want to continue to work with. And so I think from an employee retention perspective, there's a lot of value there. But then beyond that, we really are driving the policies within the company. So for example, Raytheon was one of the first aerospace companies to get 100% on the HRC's Corporate Equality Index back in 2005. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the Pride Group. We drove to change the benefits for our employees, for example, and change policies. And so from that perspective, I think it's been an evolution. But at this point, standing here today, I can confidently share with you that our senior leadership fully appreciates everything that we are doing, and they're doubling down on the investment that we've all been making in our employee resource groups.
Thank you for sharing that. It's great to see that the work that you're doing is really impacting, not only your organization, but then the company as a whole. And it's great to see that leadership is kind of really paying attention to that. And you brought up
I was just gonna add on, just from like my level. I know Martha is like definitely at the more senior level, but just like down on my own like site individual level, having that that recognition and that response back from the senior level means a lot. And I'm sure in the past maybe I'm sure it wasn't as easy as it was, but for me to set up everything, it was nonstop, pretty much like, what can we provide for you? What do you need? Like, how can we support you? So from that perspective, from the lower down perspective, it's definitely appreciated. And I definitely feel like, the enterprise employees definitely care.
Thank you, giving the perspective of kind of the local level. And then this next question, I'd love to hear it both from the kind of the enterprise level, and then also if someone wants to jump in on the more local level. A question around, for organizations, we mentioned about getting buy-in from, executive stakeholders and having those sponsors. But then a question came in around, how do you kind of position getting funding? So Martha, if you want to answer it from kind of that level, and then love to hear someone talk about it from the local level.
Yeah, sure. The money question is always the important one. And so I think first I'd like to share my opinion that you can actually do a lot with very little in terms of an employee resource group. But as I've shared with you in my personal experience, the more institutional support you get, the greater your impact to the organization as a whole can be. And so when it comes to trying to identify potential funds, just like as it comes to trying to get key stakeholder buy-in, it really depends on your organization. I do think you go back and you look at what are you trying to accomplish in the employee resource group, and align interests. So if you're trying to make your company more diverse in its hiring practices and its talent attraction, then you would go to the talent broker teams, the acquisition teams, and see if you can engage and get some funding from them. If you're looking to make sure that your company is hitting the right target market, or the products and services are hitting the right tone, then you'd go and perhaps to your marketing team and try to see if there's some alignment there. Once you do that and you're able to show some quick wins, you're already able to give the value proposition that you need to further fund your efforts. And so that's in my experience, how we've been able to do it.
And does some of that funding trickle down to the local level, or is that kind of on the local level to kind of go and kind of build their business case and then maybe go to their local HR business partner or talent acquisition or marketing teams?
Well, Raytheon Technologies has committed to its employee resource groups. As you've heard it, we've been around for quite some time. And so we are actually operated as having our own budgets. Each region has a budget, and then the regions help fund the efforts at the local level. And so while I wouldn't say that the budget is huge, it's been sufficient for us to do everything that we would like to do from an employee resource group perspective. And that's really what empowers us to be as successful as we are at Raytheon Technologies.
Great. Well, I think there's some good tips or ideas for people that are kind of maybe looking to start their own. Anyone want to add from the local perspective, kind of anything regards to kind of suggestions or kind of topics around the funding piece? No? All right. Well, we can, there's a few other questions. And thank you, audience, for your questions and curiosity around the ERG, the topic, and Raytheon Technologies. There's a question around how do you define, or how do ERGs define membership? Is it sign up or active participation?
Yeah, we struggle with that, I think. There are many different ways that you can measure it. Internally to Raytheon, we do set up metrics. And it actually goes across both of those areas. So one way that we measure it is how many folks that have joined up our employee resource group itself. And so we track the pure numbers against the number of employees that we currently have as part of our company. And then beyond that, we also look at engagement. So how many folks are attending our events? And in this virtual world, we're actually even tracking it down to how many questions are asked during these events to show that these events are, whether they are helpful or not, and are interesting. And so I do think it's important, if you're trying to sell it as a success story, to create metrics that make sense for your company. And then go ahead and champion that out so that the leadership can see that you're making a meaningful difference.
That's really some good ways to look at it, and amazing to see that you track it down to the questions. So question around, and I would love to hear maybe Shannon and Thomas, it sounds like you both have participated in some events. So I'd love to hear, there's a question around any tips around encouraging engagement and participation with the virtual events.
Yeah, I guess my biggest piece of advice from someone who has no experience at Raytheon planning events, but I used to plan like section events at school for band all the time, is to ask your members what they might be interested in, ask for suggestions. You don't have to come up with all the ideas yourself. And feel free to try new things, like try as many of the suggestions as you feel are valuable, and see which ones engage people and which ones don't, and feel free to then develop those ideas further and just run with them.
Yeah, I would just hammer in on that point of coming up with newer ideas. I actually really like the idea of the Among Us weekly Unite thing that Shannon mentioned. I'll probably mention that to our YesNet head. I know some of the other things too are just like more passive things as well. But this is more in like the real world events. Like one of the things I'm planning to do, we're doing like a treat day for Ray Pride, and the flag, the flag, the Pride flag has changed. And I know a lot of people have reached out and have asked me, hey, what happened with this? So I'm going to put out some flyers, you know what I mean? And that explain why the change happened. I think it really is just kind of getting new things as well as doing things that might catch people's eyes that they wouldn't necessarily have looked at. How many times have you walked past something, even like, wait, what was that? So you do stuff like that really catches people's attention.
Jessica, saw you coming off mute a moment ago. So anything else to add around kind of virtual participation and ideas?
I just wanted to say that last year when we were doing all virtual, I got someone reached out to me from the YesNet Northeast region, which is a different ERG, different region, but he reached out to several people who were part of Pride celebrations, and he said, is there anything that I can help you do to celebrate Pride? And I thought that was such a neat idea, because he didn't just wait for Ray Pride to jump in and do something for Pride Month. He said, I'm YesNet, but I want to make sure Pride is celebrated and I want to help. And so he asked me, I responded to the email. It was to a few people. And I said, I'm not a great event planner. Like I said earlier, I'm not into a bunch of social groups. I said, but I'd love to help somehow. So, usually if you send that kind of email, they respond with, oh, okay, well, we'll see how, we'll see what you can help with. But he actually responded and he said, well, what do you like? What do you enjoy? It's like, well, I enjoy writing, and I think people's stories are very important. And so he said, well, what about something like an email, some kind of feature? And so what blossomed from that was just fantastic, because we started last year with a daily Pride email that celebrated like Ellen DeGeneres, RuPaul, a lot of the famous figures, and a few that weren't famous. We got a few people from Raytheon itself and Raytheon family. And then, so that was really fun. We did a trivia day with all the information we had learned. So when Black History Month came around this year, I thought, what he did for me, I could do for them. And so I asked them, hey, do you guys need anything done for Black History Month? Can we do something similar? And so I was able to do Black History Month. We did the same kind of feature. And which, each time we do this, it's like all of us learn so much, and it's so much about education and just knowing what's going on in other people's worlds. And sorry, I'm making sure my puppy's not eating my feet. But then, going into Women's History Month in March, we asked the people on the email distribution, can you share about a woman in your life who has encouraged you? And so it was not just famous people, it was our own family. And they wrote lengthy stories, and they said, this was her story, this is where she's from, what she did. And they were just so inspirational. And so during that month, I got an email from somebody from RAPA, which is Asian Pacific Association, who wanted to celebrate May with the AAPI Heritage Month. And so we did a similar thing. That time, however, all 9 of the Raytheon Heritage ERGs, in other words, before the merger, we had 9 in Raytheon. All of them volunteered to create at least one feature for that month. And so each day we had a feature of someone from the AAPI community that we were celebrating, and they were all submitted by each ERG back to back. And so, starting with that one conversation with Alex Cusick, for those who know who that is in this group, coming from just that single conversation, we were able to, make this a monthly thing and just carry it forward. So it's just been great. And of course, we're carrying it on this month with Pride.
Yeah, I think the overall arching theme is find people who are passionate about what they do and help encourage their passion. There are many different ways to get engagement, but at the end of the day, you got to put on the event, you've got to do something. And, I thoroughly enjoy my participation in the group. You can hear the passion from Shannon, Thomas, and Jessica as well. And so that's how I think you keep it vibrant and alive.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's so cool. I think it's so cool that someone from another area of the company reached out and started something, and a tiny little spark, is carried to each group. And it is the stories that people need to hear to personalize. And it's great to think about the Ellens and RuPauls of the world. But, when you can personalize to say, oh, the puppy made an appearance. So in the last couple minutes, what I would love to do is, I usually always ask this question at the end of each event, but I'd like to kind of take a little spin on it. I would love to either ask you to share one piece of advice that you would have for someone kind of interested in an ERG group, whether that means participating in one or kind of starting their own, or maybe a piece of kind of career advice that you would give yourself. So we'll start counterclockwise on my screen. So if Shannon, if you want to start first, and then we'll finish with Thomas, Jessica, and Martha.
Sure. I guess I would just say, if anything sparks your interest at whatever company you're working at, or even just in your local community, just go for it, try it out, see if you like it. A big part of this pandemic has emphasized how much we need social connections, and joining a group at your company or in your community can help you a lot, both personally, and it helps with networking if you're joining a group at work or in your community, and it's just overall beneficial. So if you're on the fence about trying to reach out, I would say just go for it.
Great advice. Thomas?
Everything that Shannon obviously said. I guess a little bit more of a mantra that's a little bit more global advice that I've told to so many people, and I think it applies to almost every situation you're in. No matter how bad it is right now, like how stressful setting something up or doing something, 3 months from now, you won't even really remember it. You'll feel better and everything will be good. And how many people will be thankful for whatever you've done. So that would be my little tidbit of advice, along with everything that Shannon said. So.
Jessica?
Sorry, I was reading the questions in the chat. Can you remind me of the question?
No. Well, yeah, I know. Now all these questions, we're almost done, and we have so many more to go into. The question was just advice that you would give, to someone looking to join an ERG group or start one, or maybe if you don't have any, or if Shannon and Thomas have taken all the great suggestions, any career advice that you would give.
Yes, I think that being a part of this, just like I said earlier, kind of opens you up to conversations. And that can be so powerful, not just for workplace networking, which has been huge for me to meet people. You have this common passion, and with that common passion, you're able to connect on a personal level. And at the same time, you learn what other people's jobs are. And then, from there, I feel like that's a foundation that can build up to, I heard that you were interested in this kind of work. We have something opening up here, and you have those people that and you're like, you know what, they're good at this, or we've had conversations about this. And so now I know who I can talk to. And I am a very big, component? No, that's not the word. Anyway, a supporter of the idea that if you don't know the answer, just meet the people who know the answers. And so that's what the ERG has helped me do as well.
Yeah, and you know, piggybacking off of that, from my perspective, any work that is in the DE&I realm, you have to be willing to make mistakes. All of us are learning and growing as individuals and allies and advocates, and so I think sometimes people get paralyzed in taking that first step, and I really just encourage folks not to, kind of along the lines of what Shannon said. Secondly, I would also get comfortable with hearing no, and don't take it as the last answer. I know there's a question that comes up about how do ERGs help change policies in companies, and at Raytheon and other companies that I've been part of. They're at the forefront of advocating for policy changes, for getting the marketing, branding to be changed to be more inclusive. For example, our ERG did champion the inclusion of pronouns in our signature lines, and it's actually in our templates that people are given. And so those are ways that you can advance it, but you know, I will share that you don't always get yes the first time around, so keep asking, and you might get surprised at some point.
Well, thank you for participating in today's panel. Thank you, Raytheon Technologies, for sponsoring this summit. They have been a longtime partner of PowerToFly. It is always a pleasure to work with everyone on the Raytheon Technologies team. As I mentioned, Raytheon is a client and partner of PowerToFly, so I believe Meg probably is going to put their company page information. Feel free to check it out, follow them, keep up with the great work that they're doing with PowerToFly. And thank you all for kind of tuning into this panel, and we will hand it back to Meg.
Thank you so much, Aimee. I'm super excited to give a great round of applause for this amazing panel.